Hello and welcome. Today we are looking at Matilda, the old family favourite children's book that was then later made into a film adaptation and much more recently into a musical. The story of a young gifted girl who has to endure the abuse and neglect of her family and also her headmistress, only to find out that lo and behold she has telekinetic powers, because of course she does, and then she uses said powers to defend herself and to fight back against the people that have wronged her in her life, and then she lives happily ever after. Or does she? Because there was a trend a while ago for Tim Burton to come along and make a dark, gritty reboot of some kind of family favourite story. So that got me thinking, what if there was a dark, gritty reboot of Matilda made, maybe set 20 years after the original film? What would that look like? Well, today we're hopefully going to answer that. I'm going to work on an illustration to illustrate what I think that would look like, and meanwhile voiceover Carrie will be reading out a little story to set the scene, as it were. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's catch up with where the book leaves off. Matilda's parents have fled the country to escape the law, leaving Matilda's teacher, Miss Honey, to adopt her, and now they live together in Miss Honey's reclaimed family home after running the evil headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, out of town. And Matilda's powers fade away due to finally being allowed to be taught at her actual intellectual level in a much older class, and therefore not having enough brain power free to make matter defy gravity, which makes sense, I guess. The story continues. For the next few years, Matilda and Miss Honey live in apparent bliss, both having the loving family that they had longed for so long. But behind closed doors, they also shared in each other's pain, as they, for the first time, could come to terms with the abuse and trauma that they had spent their entire lives living with. Both had grown up being subjected to physical and mental torment and neglect, but together they hoped to find ways to cope. Although both found each other's love and affection to be immensely healing, Matilda found that what helped more than anything was simply absorbing herself in her studies to hide from the pain. This meant that Matilda's intellect grew even faster than it ever had. By 10, she'd begun a university degree. By 15, she was probing the limits of human knowledge in physics, chemistry and biology. Miss Honey, on the other hand, could only watch as Matilda became more independent and ever more engrossed in learning far beyond most people's capabilities. And despite Matilda's somewhat divided love and attention, Miss Honey felt ever more isolated and alone, and found herself turning to drink and other narcotics to try and cope. By the time Matilda was 20, she was growing increasingly frustrated, as there were no more books or teachers that could teach her anything that she didn't already know. And by now Miss Honey had grown a heavy dependence on drink and drugs, so arguments between the two of them had become a common occurrence. One evening, Miss Honey was in a particularly bad state. Matilda had seen this scene one too many times. She had spent many an evening trying to convince Miss Honey to seek the help that she needed, but her advice always seemed to fall on deaf ears. This time Matilda had lost all patience. She flew into a rant about how she'd wasted her life, about how far she had fallen, unrecognisable she had become from the woman that had comforted and cared for her all those years ago. Miss Honey replied in a slew of slurred insults, which quickly led to both women shouting in each other's faces with more and more ferocity, neither party backing down until Miss Honey felt the blow of a gin bottle she'd been drinking from slam into the side of her head as it was launched from the table from where it had been sitting. It seems Matilda's powers had reawoken. Slightly dazed, with blood and gin running down her face, Miss Honey screamed at Matilda, telling her to pack her things and to leave, and that she was no longer welcome in this house. Matilda was happy to oblige and decided to find her long-lost parents in their new lives after their escape from the law. Her mother had given her the name of the town that they were heading for, so it didn't take her too long to track them down. She was hoping her father had seen the error of his ways and was finally living as a decent, honest man. When she arrived at the Wormwood's grand and overstated villa, though, she was met with an entirely different sight. As Matilda stood in the villa's entrance courtyard, suitcase in hand, Harry Wormwood appeared at the front door. No warm greeting, no heartfelt welcome after all those years apart. "Oh, look who showed up," he said. "The bookworm." What are you here? You need money, huh? I knew it. Where have your books gotten you, huh? Where have your teachers got you? Nowhere. I was right all along. Matilda couldn't believe what she was hearing, and disbelief soon turned to rage as her mother came out to see what the commotion was about. Recognising her daughter immediately, she went straight into a similar vein of mocking questions. Where's that little teacher friend of yours? Still teaching snot-nosed brats their ABCs? How much money have you found in your books lately? I've got literal heaps of it indoors. Matilda's eyes were burning with anger, and once again she could feel her powers seething inside her, but she suddenly realised they felt different now. After all those years laying dormant, they were now stronger than ever. Whether it's due to the growth of her knowledge and intellect over the years, or simply the trauma that Matilda never did truly reconcile, she could feel everything around her, every pebble on the ground, every blade of grass, every loose thread on her father's overpriced suit, every molecule, every atom, from inside her mind. And slowly, as she glared into the eyes of her father, Matilda realised she could see into his mind. She could see all of his thoughts, feelings, memories in one clear vision. Matilda saw how instead of turning over a new leaf in his new life, Harry Wormwood had gone straight back into selling second-hand cars in his usual underhand way. Not only that, but he made some fairly lucrative deals with some local gangsters to sell the stolen cars they bought him, and quickly became the go-to guy for the local cartel when it came to buying and selling any black market items, contraband, drugs, even people. And what made it worse was she could see that both her parents genuinely took pleasure in abusing the people around them to grow their ill-gotten fortunes. Suddenly Matilda had a moment of clarity, a feeling she recognised from all those years previous in the moments before she banished Miss Trunchbull from her life. As Matilda's lip began to quiver, both parents snorted incredulously, but were cut off when they felt their entire bodies being lifted off the ground, as if they were slowly being hoisted up on invisible ropes high above the courtyard. They began to feel their skin, tissue, bones and organs being somehow pulled outwards in all directions simultaneously. And in the midst of the intense pain, Harry Wormwood managed to splutter out a simple,
"Why?"
With tears in her eyes but a steady and clear voice, she simply repeated the words her father had once spoken to her. When a person is bad, that person has to be taught a lesson. And with that she threw out her arms as her parents exploded into clouds of vaporized tissue. And as she stood there feeling the warm rain of blood fall down onto her face, she knew things would be different now. The years of torment and unresolved trauma, watching her closest friend who had once loved and supported her consumed by drink and drugs, and finally confronted by the reality that her parents really were the same hateful people they had always been, with no sense of remorse. For all the books and lessons, there was one thing that it had taken Matilda all that time to finally learn. The world is filled with bad people who continually take pleasure in abusing and hurting others simply because there is no one there that will stop them. Nobody, until now.
No more Miss Mason.
Matilda's mission was clear: to test and pass judgment on anyone unfortunate enough to cross her path. Every thought they ever had, every book they ever read, every conversation they ever heard, every one of that person's memories would be hers. And of course, if that person had been bad, that person would be taught a lesson. But if there's one thing you can be sure of, it's that Matilda will always find something, some minor misconduct or trivial transgression, some form of wrongdoing that went unanswered for. There is no hiding from her probing eye as it buries deep into your soul. And when she finds what she's looking for, her punishment will be swift and final.